In 2000, a community college librarian named Red Wassenich called into a local Austin radio station during a pledge drive. When the host asked why he supported the show, Wassenich said he didn't know exactly, that it just helped keep Austin weird. He started printing bumper stickers. He gave them away for free. He never trademarked the phrase because, as his wife later said, commercializing is the antithesis of weird. A local company trademarked it anyway. It ended up on t-shirts in airport gift shops. Wassenich found this understandably distressing. That sequence, a genuine local sentiment about resisting commercialization becoming a commercial product used to attract the exact forces it was meant to resist, is the story of Austin in about 4 sentences. The city spent 20 years advertising its authenticity and then was surprised to discover that advertising authenticity to enough people eventually destroys it. Keep Austin Weird lasted about as long as Austin stayed affordable. The weird left with the rent. Austin in the 1990s was genuinely unusual for a mid-sized Sunbelt city. The University of Texas gave it 50,000 students, an intellectual and cultural density that cities twice its size could not manufacture. Barton Springs Pool was a free outdoor swimming hole in the middle of the city. The 6th Street live music corridor, the Congress Avenue Bridge, with its 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats. The Cathedral of Junk somebody built in their South Austin yard, an entire microeconomy of independent bookstores and record shops and venues that existed because rents were low enough to let things exist without immediately becoming profitable. Between 1990 and 2000, the city grew by nearly 200,000 people and earned the nickname Silicon Hills as Dell, Motorola, and IBM established operations in the area. It was growing, but it was growing into itself rather than into a copy of somewhere else. Then it became a copy of somewhere else. The process took about a decade and was completely predictable from the beginning, and nobody who could have changed it did, and now downtown Austin has a 25% office vacancy rate and a $10.3 billion light rail system that has been scaled back to 9.8 miles. So let's talk about what went wrong and in what order, because the order matters. Start with the road, because the road is where everything in American cities starts. Interstate 35 runs through the heart of Austin from north to south, and it was completed in May 1962. It was not routed through Austin because of traffic engineering efficiency. It followed a line the city had already drawn in 1928, a master plan that forced Black residents to move east of East Avenue. Banks and lenders used that avenue as a border to decide who could access loans. I-35 was built on top of that line and made it permanent. A highway that enforced racial segregation was embedded in Austin's urban fabric before the civil rights movement had legally ended the segregation it was reinforcing. The neighborhoods east of I-35 were redlined. Banks used the highway as the literal boundary for denying mortgages. The communities that had been pushed east of that line in 1928 were now cut off from the west side of Austin by a controlled access interstate. This is the road Austin is currently spending $4.9 billion to expand. The Interstate 35 expansion project is one of the largest road projects in Austin's history, opposed by the Austin City Council, Travis County Commissioners, civil rights organizations, and urban planning groups, including the Congress for New Urbanism, which declared Interstate 35 a freeway with no future. The opposition is not simply political. It is based on the same principle that Houston demonstrated with the Katy Freeway. Wider highways produce more traffic. The phenomenon is called induced demand. Adding lanes makes driving more attractive, more people drive longer distances more often, and the travel times increase anyway. Houston spent $2.8 billion widening the Katy Freeway to 23 lanes and watched commute times get 55% worse. Austin is now spending nearly $5 billion on an expansion of a road that was built as a segregation tool opposed by its own city government and is expected by most traffic researchers to make congestion worse. The Katy Freeway is a freeway with no future. Austin looked at that lesson and decided to build its own. Austin failed its first light rail vote in 2000 by fewer than 2,000 votes out of over 300,000 cast. Within Austin's city limits, voters approved the measure. The territory polled included all of Capital Metro's service area, and voters outside the city tipped the decision. A second attempt in 2014 failed by 57%, a much wider margin. Two chances to build transit before the growth wave arrived, both gone. In November 2020, Austin voters approved Project Connect, a transit plan that promised 27 miles of light rail for approximately $5.8 billion. Urbanists celebrated. The city was finally doing it. And then the estimates came in: inflationary pressure, rising real estate costs, and a tunnel that grew from 1.56 miles to 4.19 miles pushed the actual cost toward $10.3 billion. By 2023, the city had reduced the project to 9.8 miles at the same budget. What voters approved as a 27-mile system is now a 9.8-mile system that costs roughly double what was promised, which is not an ideal outcome when you are asking residents to pay a permanent property tax increase to fund it. Austin has now failed to build meaningful transit 3 times in 25 years. During those 25 years, it absorbed roughly 400,000 new residents, every one of them housed in a car-dependent development pattern because the transit that could have made density work was never built. The Domain, the major tech employment hub, is 10 miles from downtown and accessible primarily by car. Austin built employment centers in residential areas at opposite ends of a car-dependent city, and then did not build the infrastructure to connect them differently. Between 2020 and 2022, the median home price in Austin rose from approximately $390,000 to a peak of $555,000 in April 2022. That is a larger increase in 2 years than in the entire previous decade. Oracle moved its headquarters to Austin in 2020. Tesla followed in 2021. Hundreds of startups relocated. Thousands of tech workers, primarily from California, arrived with high salaries and began competing for a housing stock that had been priced for a much smaller city. The affordable alternative to San Francisco became briefly, not obviously cheaper than San Francisco, and considerably less convenient if you were used to a city with transit. The infrastructure that had barely handled pre-pandemic Austin was now handling tens of thousands of additional residents with the same roads, the same highway, and a transit system that remained, despite the 2020 vote, still unbuilt. Austin ranked 22nd in the United States for traffic congestion, with drivers losing an average of 39 hours annually to delays. The answer to this was to expand Interstate 35. Opponents noted that this was an enormous amount of money to spend, making a problem worse. And then the boom moderated. Oracle moved to Nashville after 4 years. Meta canceled office leases. Tesla cut more than 2,600 jobs in April 2024. Tech employment fell 1.6% in 2024. Startup employment fell 4.9%, and the remote workers who had arrived during the pandemic began returning to their California headquarters when return-to-office mandates made proximity matter again. Downtown Austin's office vacancy rate reached 22.3% in 2025, the highest since tracking began in 2000. Citywide, it hit 25%. Major towers built in anticipation of demand that peaked in 2022 were sitting mostly empty. Austin's growth rate between 2023 and 2024 was 0.4%, the lowest of any major Texas city. Fort Worth surpassed Austin as the 4th largest Texas city in 2025, and Austin fell from the national top 10 to 12th. The city is now facing a $33 million budget deficit for fiscal year 2026, projected to grow to $79.9 million by 2030. The city that was collecting windfall tax revenues from corporate relocations 4 years ago is in a structural fiscal shortfall. Austin built for a boom and is now paying the operating costs on a shrinking tax base. None of this makes Austin a failed city. The employment rate remains above the national average. Housing prices have been declining since 2022, which is uncomfortable for developers and is actually good news for working-class residents who were priced out during the boom. The University of Texas is still there. Barton Springs is still there. The bones of what made Austin unusual have not disappeared. What has disappeared is the affordability that allowed the unusual things to exist in the first place. The independent venues on 6th Street have been closing for years, replaced by bars catering to the bachelorette party economy that now defines a significant portion of the city's nightlife revenue. But the more significant displacement story is not about the creative class. It is about who was already there before the creative class arrived. Between 2000 and 2010, East Austin neighborhoods saw a 66% decrease in Black population, a 33% decrease in Latino population, and a 442% increase in white population. The communities that had been forced east of Interstate 35 by the city's 1928 segregation plan, and then cut off from the west side by the highway in 1962, were now being priced out of East Austin as the neighborhood became desirable to higher-income residents moving in from the west. Median rent in Austin has increased 120% since 2000. As of 2026, the city's own housing department published an interactive displacement map documenting how Black and Hispanic communities have moved progressively further from the city center with each passing decade. Austin's growth is now increasingly driven by international migration as domestic Hispanic and Black residents leave. The city built on top of the people it displaced in 1928 and displaced them again in 2010. And is now watching them leave the metro entirely. The Interstate 35 section that is getting widened at $4.9 billion runs directly through the corridor where that displacement happened. One more thing worth naming, Austin is still adding jobs, ranking 10th among the top 50 American metros in the year ending May 2025. But the sectors driving that growth have shifted to education, healthcare, government, and hospitality. Austin is growing back toward the city it was before Silicon Hills, only more expensive. With empty tech towers and a transit system that costs more every year, it remains unbuilt. Red Wassenich coined Keep Austin Weird to support a radio station that played offbeat music. He gave the bumper stickers away free. He believed that commercializing was the antithesis of weird. Someone else trademarked the phrase, sold it to souvenir shops, and used it to market condos. Wassenich found this distressing. He kept trying to preserve things anyway, the Cathedral of Junk, the Congress Avenue Bridge bats, the things that cost nothing and took decades to accumulate. He died in 2020, the same year Austin voters finally approved a light rail system that has since been halved in scope and doubled in cost. Austin's problem is not that it grew. Cities are supposed to grow. Austin's problem is that it grew without building the infrastructure that makes growth livable, spent 30 years refusing to build transit during the exact period when it would have been cheapest and most effective, and then approved it during the most expensive construction period in recent American history. It is now spending nearly $15 billion on a highway expansion and a light rail system simultaneously. In a city of 900,000 people, the highway expected to make traffic worse, and the light rail a fraction of what was promised. It built itself into a corner using the same tools every other American city used, and then was surprised to arrive in the same corner. The weird left with the rent. The rent is still high, the transit is still not built, and the road that divided the city in 1962 is getting wider.